In this video, we're going to explore performance management and we're going to have a look at something called the performer checklist. Performance management doesn't just mean dealing with poor performance. It also means making excellent performance infectious. But some organisations struggle with that. And that is sometimes because performance management is not part of the culture. There isn't a strong strategic narrative in the sense that people don't necessarily understand that what they do contributes to the overall success of the organisation. So there isn't a really strong strategic narrative that sort of run through the organisation. And also, we don't really know what good looks like. So there's going to be clarity on standards. And also, we've got to catch people doing things right rather than catching people doing things wrong. If we catch people doing things right and we celebrate success, we can create a culture of positive performance management. But poor performance does exist in organisations, and sometimes it's really difficult to deal with poor performance. So why is it difficult? Well, sometimes we don't have conversations about performance early enough. So poor performance becomes the norm. People aren't challenged. And also, if somebody is performing poorly, either we fix a problem ourselves or we move the problem somewhere else. So what can happen in organisations is leaders can inherit underperforming people. So if it's not dealt with earlier, it's really difficult to tackle it. And if we do need to evoke formal procedures, it's really difficult. And it might become protracted because there haven't been earlier conversations. So dealing with stale problems can be difficult. And if we do raise a performance issue, sometimes the person that we're talking to says, "What's the problem? Why me? Why now? This hasn't been mentioned before. If you have a look at my past appraisals, I've been doing a good job." So it becomes difficult tackling that kind of poor performance. So it's all about acting early. If we can catch people doing things right, and we do it quickly, and we do it early enough, and we can actually celebrate that, we can make good performance infectious. But if people are not performing, again, we've got to act quickly and act early. Because if we do need to move to some kind of formal process, it can be protracted if we haven't had those earlier conversations. So addressing capability issues informally at an early stage can avoid or reduce the time in dealing with these problems later on. So how do we make good performance infectious? Well, in the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you something called the performer checklist. Now, this is just a number of steps that you can think about to help maximize the performance of the individuals and the teams that you lead. So performer stands for purpose, environment, resources, feedback, organization, review, motivation, effect, and reward. And under each of those areas, I'm going to pose you a number of questions or things to think about. Now, let's have a look at purpose first of all. I've already used the term strategic narrative, making sure people understand the contribution they make to the overall goals of the organisation. So, are people aware of the purpose of their role? Are they aware of the organisation's main aims and values, or your part of the organisation's main aims and values? Are they aware of what good looks like? Are they aware of how their job fits into the overall scheme of things and how the outputs of their job may become the inputs of somebody else's job? So it's all about putting it into context, about making sure that people understand how what they do impacts upon the overall organisation. We've also got to think about how the environment impacts upon performance. So the job does not just take place in isolation. There's lots of things affecting it. So the physical environment, is it too warm? Is it too cold? Too light? Too dark? But what about the social environment? What's the relationships like between co-workers, between managers and staff? What's the organisational environment like? Do we work in silos? Is there good communication between different teams? And what about the political environment? And that's with a small p. What's the office politics like, or the organisational politics? So sometimes the environment can have a positive or negative effect on how work is carried out. Now, our people need the right resources to do the job in the best way they can. And sometimes the resource question or the resource issue can be cited as a problem to doing a good job. So the computer's faulty, or I've got out of date equipment, or if only we had X, Y, or Z. Sometimes those are true, sometimes they're a bit of a red herring. Yes, we've got to make sure that resources are fit for purpose. But what about resource such as time? Are people giving the right time to do the job? Are they given the right kind of support to do the job? So the resource issue can be a big one, and we've got to make sure that the resources are shared equitably, and also that if there are resource issues, we deal with them quickly. It was the management writer Kenneth Blanchard who said, "Feedback is the breakfast of champions." So as a leader, we have got to create a culture of two-way feedback. We've got to make sure that feedback is given quickly. We've got to make sure that feedback is constructive. We've got to make sure that we give feedback on not only outcomes, but how a job was done as well. And we've also got to make sure that people can enact upon that feedback. So giving feedback and then helping people act upon that feedback can help to maintain performance or improve performance. And I like to think of feedback as part of the equation. Feedback has got to lead to feed forward. So through timely, specific feedback, what do we need to continue doing? What do we need to start doing? What do we need to stop doing? And do we have that culture of good, honest and constructive two-way feedback? The O of the performer checklist stands for organisation. And I don't mean the overall organisation, the university, for example. I'm talking about how work is organised. So how is work delegated? Are we making it clear that people are given the responsibility and the authority to do a particular role? But remember, with delegation, if you are delegating, you as a delegator always retain that accountability. Is there equity in workload models? Do we understand how one task impacts upon another task? Do we understand that there's a critical path of things that need to be done? Are we aware of blockages, of duplicate information, or where there isn't enough information? Are we aware of an internal customer chain about how one particular job impacts upon another particular job? Now, organisation is important because we're going to look at how work flows through an organisation, because sometimes there may be blockages or challenges that we need to overcome. Now, I've already mentioned the F of performer, meaning feedback. This second R stands for review. And what I mean by review is building on the ideas of feedback. Do we review process as well as outcomes? Do we review what we've achieved, but also review how we achieved it? What was the impact on the working relationships? How often do we review the competence levels of our people? What skills do they have? What skills do they need to develop? Do we review the training and development opportunities that are open to them? And do we have regular performance conversations? Now, lots of organisations have a PDR or appraisal or an annual review, which is great, but we've got to make sure those conversations keep going. It's got to be part of the normal conversational culture of the organisation. So reviewing is really important. So reviewing is about giving feedback, but it's making sure that we are having timely reviews. Now the M stands for motivation. And I'd like you to think about what motivates you. What gets you firing on all cylinders? What motivates the people that you lead? Do you know their motivators? How do you know their motivators? How well do you know your staff? Now, motivation is really important, especially when we're coming to performance management, because if we can motivate our staff to get what they want, we can help them maximize their performance. And there is an American writer called Dan Pink who talks about motivation in the 21st century. And he talks about motivation as having three main elements. Giving people the autonomy to do the role in the way that they want to do the role. Allowing them to use the skills and capabilities they've got, in other words, mastery, but also giving them a sense of purpose, giving them that strong strategic narrative so that they know they're making a difference. So motivation is really important, and it's at the heart sometimes of performance management. We've got to make sure that we are motivating staff. We've got to know what motivates them, and we need to make the linkage between their effort, their results, and their achievement of what motivates them. Now, I'm going to say this with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek. What is the best way to get out of doing the washing up? It's to do it badly. If you do it badly, you don't get asked to do the washing up again. Now, this is what the E for effect is looking at. If I do a job badly, does it mean that I don't get given that job again because it goes to somebody who can do it better than me? If I do a job particularly well, does that mean that job is always given to me? So sometimes what impacts performance management is this perception that good performance is a disincentive and poor performance is rewarding. So how is performance viewed in your teams? Does this affect, really impact upon how people perceive the jobs that they are given? Now, the final part of the performer checklist links back to motivation, and it's looking at this area of reward. How are rewards perceived in your organisation? Now, there may be extrinsic rewards, money, bonus, those kind of things. But what about intrinsic reward? A sense of accomplishment, a sense of achievement, a sense of recognition. Now, reward is really important, and we could talk for hours on reward strategies, but that's not my intention. What is important is knowing your staff, knowing what matters to them, and helping them make the link that if I increase my effort, I'm going to increase my performance. If I increase my performance, I'm going to achieve more outcomes. If I achieve more outcomes, I'm going to get more results. And if I get more results, I'm going to get rewards. But the rewards have got to be seen to be valuable to the individual. So again, it's getting to know your people and what rewards really turn them on. Now, we've looked at the performer checklist: purpose, environment, resources, feedback, organisation, review, motivation, effect and reward. Let's now have a look at some tips on how to make high performance infectious. Tip 1. It's about time. Ignoring the performance of staff, both good performance and bad performance, lowers the morale of your people. It also diminishes the quality and reduces teamwork. So part of it is being an engaging leader and going out there and giving people feedback on what you see. The second tip is something I'm sure you've heard before: praise in public, reprimand in private. Let other people know what's going really well and what successes people have had, because that makes good performance infectious. But if people have done something wrong, take them to one side. Tip number 3 is all about the power of questioning. When you're giving feedback, sometimes we default to telling them what we've seen or telling them what we think of the work that they've done. Sometimes it's better to ask them questions to encourage self-reflection and make them into that kind of reflective practitioner. So ask them questions about how they feel they are performing in their role. Tip 4 is about keeping your options wide open. And this is where the performer checklist may come in. Levels of performance often have more than one cause. So if people are performing well, what is it that's underpinning that great performance? If people aren't performing, there may be more than one cause. So perhaps use a checklist to do that little bit more analysis. Tip number 5 is about getting to know your people, getting to know what motivates them. Link effort to results and results to reward. What rewards do your people find valuable? Tip number 6 continues with the theme of motivation. If a task is to intrinsically motivate somebody, then either the results or the outcomes must meet the needs of that individual. It should give them a sense of achievement. It should have that intrinsic motivational quality. Tip number 7 is about standards and purpose. Communicate the purpose, communicate the quality and standards required before a task begins, not after people have started working. Make sure that those standards are well known and understood before any effort is exerted. Remember I mentioned Dan Pink? Well, in his book Drive, he talks about autonomy, mastery and purpose. What we know is that menial tasks, a low autonomy, a lack of purpose and micromanagement all lead to lower performance. So remember, you need to make sure that people have a sense of autonomy, they're using their skills and capabilities, and they understand what difference they make. Tip number 9 is about engagement and empowerment. If we get people involved and we ask for their suggestions on what could be better, we tend to increase their involvement, and that improves performance rather than detracts from it. So use the knowledge and experience of your staff to help make improvements. And finally, to help make performance improvement part of the team culture, create opportunities for supportive challenge. Create opportunities for two-way team feedback and opportunities to look at the way that people are working and what they're achieving. If we can engage people and get them involved, we can create a high performance culture. And that's it. That's performance management and the perform checklist.